What if the biggest messages humans ever made weren't meant for humans at all? Picture it, you're standing in the Peruvian desert. Heat shimmers off the ground. The horizon is a flat, endless line, and all you see is gravel. No monuments, no statues, no temples rising into the sky, nothing that looks like a masterpiece. Then you climb a nearby hill, or you take off in a small plane, and suddenly the desert flips into a different reality. A hummingbird the size of a football field, a spider with perfect symmetry, a whale, a monkey with a spiraling tail, straight lines that run for kilometers like they were shot from a laser, trapezoids, spirals, shapes that seem designed to be seen from above. You didn't stumble onto random scratches. You found the Nazca Lines, and the question isn't just who made them. It's why anyone would make art you can barely see. The desert here is unusually cooperative. It almost wants to preserve secrets. The ground is covered with dark, sun-baked stones rich in iron oxide. When you scrape them aside, you reveal lighter earth beneath. That contrast makes a line. And because the region is one of the driest on Earth, with little rain and mild winds, those lines can last for centuries, even millennia. So the method is simple. But the scale is not. Some lines run so straight that they seem to ignore the bumps of the terrain. Many designs are enormous. The hummingbird is roughly 90 meters long. The monkey is close to that. The famous astronaut figure, a weird humanoid on a hillside, stares out like a signpost. Here's the part that hooks your suspicion. The full images make the most sense from the air. Yet the people associated with these lines, the Nazca culture, flourished roughly between 200 BCE and 600 CE. No airplanes, no satellites, no drones. So how did they plan them? And why commit so much effort to drawings most of the time you can't properly see? The more you learn, the more the desert feels like a stage. The lines don't just form pictures, they form pathways. Many are long corridors cleared of stones, wide enough for groups of people to walk. They intersect, they converge, they stretch toward mountains. They carve up the pampa like a giant, silent map. And the figures aren't scattered randomly either. They cluster in certain zones. They seem placed with intention, as if the desert itself was being organized. Now add another fact. The Nazca lived in a harsh environment. Water was everything. They built sophisticated irrigation and underground aqueduct systems called puquios, some of which still function today. Their survival depended on understanding seasons, mountains, and rare rains. So a new hypothesis starts to form in your head. Maybe the Nazca Lines were part of a system, not just art, not just decoration, something practical, something urgent. If you're trying to survive in a desert, you watch the sky. You watch the stars. You watch the sun. You mark time because time tells you when the rains might come and when to plant. And when you look at the Nazca Lines, you can't help noticing how many are straight, how many point, how many seem like they could be sightlines. Some researchers have suggested astronomical alignments, that some lines point to where the sun rises on solstices or where certain stars set. If you had a few fixed lines as references, you might turn the desert into a giant calendar, a way to coordinate rituals, agriculture, and the fragile rhythm of water. Then there's the imagery. Birds, spiders, monkeys, creatures that in many cultures connect to myths, fertility, rain, and the boundary between worlds. In the Nazca region, some animals also appear in pottery and textiles, which suggests they mattered symbolically, not just aesthetically. And there's another unsettling piece. Some of the lines seem to lead nowhere. They start, run arrow straight for a long distance, then simply stop. That feels less like a road and more like a gesture, like something made to be seen by an audience that isn't standing at ground level. The implications begin to widen. Because if the lines are meant to be viewed from above, you have to ask, by whom? You can reach for the most famous modern idea, the one that refuses to die. That the Nazca Lines were landing strips, beacons, or messages for extraterrestrials. The logic is seductive in its simplicity. Giant designs, visible from the sky, a desert runway. It fits the shape of the mystery. But when you slow down, you realize the real mystery isn't aliens. It's human coordination. The Nazca didn't have bulldozers. They had hands, stone tools, and social organization. Yet they produced hundreds of lines and dozens of massive figures over generations. They kept them remarkably consistent. They avoided overlaps in ways that suggest planning. And they did it in a landscape where a wrong choice could waste precious labor. So you start connecting fields: archaeology, climate science, anthropology, geometry. How do you draw a straight line kilometers long without modern equipment? You use stakes and ropes. You mark points. You align them. The desert becomes your drafting table. How do you scale up an animal drawing? You build a grid. You transfer a small design into a larger one square by square. Artists have used that trick for centuries. Suddenly, impossible becomes difficult but doable. And now the question shifts again. If they could do it, what did they want? Some lines seem to align with water sources. Some point toward the Andes, where storms are born and rivers begin. Some trapezoids and cleared areas look like stages. A place to gather, a place to move. Imagine a procession at dawn, feet crunching over stones, people carrying offerings, the desert acting like a ritual machine, guiding bodies along prescribed routes, not a picture, a performance. And then you see the weird coincidence. The lines were made in a culture where ritual and environment were tightly linked. In many ancient societies, you don't separate engineering from religion. Water is sacred because water is survival. Mountains are sacred because mountains make weather. If you want rain, you don't just calculate. You negotiate with the world. This is where the investigation gets heavy, because the Nazca Lines might be evidence of an entire way of thinking. A civilization trying to talk to forces they couldn't control. You don't have to speculate alone. Scholars have been wrestling with this for a long time. In the early 20th century, the lines were brought to wider attention as aviation made them easier to see. Researchers like Paul Kosok studied them and suggested astronomical connections. Maria Reiche, a German mathematician who devoted much of her life to the site, mapped the lines and also argued for celestial alignments, believing they formed a kind of astronomical calendar. Later, archaeologist Johan Reinhard proposed that the lines were tied to water and ritual. In his view, they were part of a sacred landscape. The Andes, the sources of water, and the desert plains formed a religious geography. Walking the lines could be a way of making offerings, asking for rain, or reinforcing social bonds around the most important resource of all. And then there's the public-facing version that turned the Nazca Lines into pop mythology. Erich von Däniken's book Chariots of the Gods pushed the alien idea into mainstream culture. It wasn't a scientific conclusion, but it shaped public imagination so strongly that people still arrive expecting proof of visitors from the stars. But now you hit the turning point. Because when you look at the actual evidence, the runway for spacecraft idea collapses under its own weight. Most of the lines are too narrow and fragile to support heavy landings. Many are on slopes or broken by terrain. They aren't engineered surfaces. They're scraped earth. And while some trapezoids are broad, they're not uniform like airstrips, and there's no sign of scorching, compression, or material changes consistent with repeated landings. You also don't need a hummingbird to land a craft. And the bigger problem is simpler. You don't need aliens to explain large ground drawings. Humans make geoglyphs in other places too, from the ancient chalk figures in England to the geoglyphs in the Atacama Desert. The Nazca Lines are extraordinary, but they're not outside human capability. So the mystery returns to Earth. Most experts today tend to favor explanations grounded in ritual, social practice, and environment. The same facts that seem alien, massive scale, visibility from above can be reinterpreted. You don't need to see the whole figure to make it meaningful. If the line is a path, the meaning is in walking it. If the figure is a sacred symbol, it might be seen by gods, spirits, ancestors, or simply exist as an offering embedded into the land. And aerial visibility doesn't require aircraft. Nearby hills and foothills provide vantage points. Some lines are visible from elevated ground, and the act of making something for the sky doesn't mean you plan to personally hover above it. It means the sky is part of your audience. But the mainstream view has its own discomforting gaps. Astronomical alignment claims are tricky. When you have many lines pointing in many directions, some will line up with something in the sky by chance. Statistical tests and later studies have challenged the idea that the majority of lines form a precise, intentional calendar. Some alignments may exist, but the grand, sky map version seems too clean for a messy reality. The ritual pathway idea also raises questions. Why these specific animals? Why these exact proportions? Why put some figures far from others? Why are certain shapes repeated? And if the lines were walked frequently, why do many remain so sharply defined? Preservation is strong here, yes, but footsteps still leave traces over time. Even the water hypothesis isn't a perfect fit. Not all lines clearly connect to water sources. Some areas with significant lines don't map neatly onto what you'd expect if the goal was purely practical. And the Nazca culture lasted for centuries. Their purposes could have changed. A line made as a ritual path in one generation could become a boundary marker in another, then later a ceremonial tradition, repeated because it's what ancestors did. The more honest the science gets, the more it admits something uncomfortable. The Nazca lines might not have one purpose. They might be a layered conversation across time. A ritual landscape, a social project, a negotiation with drought, a display of cooperation between groups, a way to claim territory without walls, a theater for belief, an archive written in negative space. And maybe that's why they still feel uncanny. Because modern life trains you to expect a single function. A tool has a job, a message has a recipient, a work of art has an audience. But the Nazca Desert doesn't play by those rules. You can stand on the ground and see almost nothing, yet you are inside the design. You are walking through a thought made physical. You are part of a picture you can't fully comprehend from where you stand. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the Nazca lines are a reminder that humans have always built things larger than themselves, not just to be seen, but to belong to something bigger, to ask for rain, to honor mountains, to bind a community together with shared labor and shared mystery. And when you look down from above, and the hummingbird appears out of the dust like it was always waiting there, you realize the desert is doing what it has always done. It's holding a message in plain sight, and letting every new generation decide what it means to be the one who finally sees it.